So last week, or I should say week before last, okay, in our dishonorable mentions, I spoke about a feature in British Vogue of actor Ncuti Gatwa. Now, I mispronounced his name in that episode, and I said Ncuti because, I just read what I saw. But shout out to Portia and everyone else who wanted to let me know I was wrong. Ncuti Gatwa, who many folks will know from the Netflix series Sex Education. He's also playing the new Doctor in Doctor Who. He's in this feature, it's a Pride feature, talking about the importance for him of having a private life and how that connects to his decision to not disclose his sexuality publicly. In a Pride feature, here's what he said. Quote, "It's a safety and mental health thing. After sex education, we all became public property to an extent. You have to fight for your right to privacy after that, but you also do feel like you owe people something. In setting my boundaries, I knew I wanted to separate the private and public, and that I never wanted my personal life to overshadow my work. I also believe that everyone is on their own journey, and it's important that no one feels an obligation to others in relation to what's happening to them internally. And that's what sex education is about, taking things at your own pace." Now, I want y'all to let that sit with you, okay? Now, this statement comes amid broader discourse in culture about folks' sexuality. I want to bring up two things, not saying that they're related, but just saying that they're happening at the same time. The other week, we spoke on the pod about Tyler James Williams's IG statement, in which he talked about the dangers of trying to figure out and speculating on people's identity, right? And then, there was this situation with one of the stars of Heartstopper, which is another show on the Netflix, Kit Connor, who, in announcing that he was bisexual late last year, tweeted, quote, "Congrats for forcing an 18-year-old to out himself. I think some of you missed the point of the show." The idea there is that he, was basically, he says, forced to label himself before he was perhaps ready to, because of all the speculation and conversation about his identity in relation to the character that he played on that show, right? Okay. Now, these are three separate situations. I'm not sure, as I already said, if there's a there between all three of them or not, but I felt compelled to provide that context. Now, what I really wanted to discuss here is the Ncuti Gatwa situation. There is something that I haven't quite been able to get out of my noggin and off of my spirit since I read that interview. And I mentioned it in the honorable mentions on that episode. I wanted to kind of tease it out in a very complex and complicado type of way, because it led me to this question. When did pride become for not queer people? Now, let me go a little further, because I'm being very specific in the language that I'm using there, okay? I didn't say when did pride become for straight people. I said, when did pride become for not queer people? When I talk about queer, I use queer in an umbrella, sense. Because, okay, sit with me, okay? Because there is a particular, in my estimation, I got to look at the camera directly instead of looking at you, Jarrett. There is a particular identification, explicit identification, that I feel like is present in what pride is about. And that specific identification is some sort of queer. Whichever one, pansexual, bisexual, gay, lesbian, etc., asexual, etc., all of them. Transgender, them too,
All the plus.
Yeah, but not people per se. And I want to be clear. I'm specifically talking about spaces in which we are platforming and talking about pride. Straight people, y'all can, not queer people, you can come to Pride Festival, you can come to the parade. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about this is a Pride spread in British Vogue magazine. And for whatever reason, this individual cannot, does not, will not, whatever, use a label that falls under this umbrella. Why are you here? To be clear, and I'm going to let you jump in, I swear, to be clear, not dismissing the very real realities, right, that so many folks have articulated about an individual's personal journey to finding and articulating whatever language works and is appropriate for them, also in light of whatever cultural circumstances one might have to navigate. But in my head, if for whatever reason you are not able to claim a label that this feature is supposed to be about, why are you here?
I mean, it definitely begs the question of pride, right? Of pride in being able to own said label, pride in being able to show up as part of a community. I do want to, when you say not queer, I know that we talked about all of the different identities in the leg booty community, but when you say for not queer people, I'm want to get some specificity in what you mean by queer.
I thought it was very specific, but I'll try it one more time.
Well, like you say. No. You say these eyebrows, bitch. Because when you say not queer people, I think of queer as anything that does not identify as wholly heterosexual, right? If there is like a bit of ambiguity or of question or whatever, what have you, I think of that as being, shift of center and like starts to veer into queerness, right? And so I'm guessing you don't see that the same way.
I don't know what you mean there, but let me try to say something and let me know if I hit on what you hitting on. I'm not talking about the dudes who, what they call them, homo flexible or hetero flexible. It's one of those ones where like
hetero flexible, yeah.
They basically straight, but like, they like to get down every now and again. I'm specifically talking about,
I understand that.
I'm having a conversation about labels, to be clear, right? And the ability to identify publicly. However you identify, if you identify as a member of the queer community, it's less about your actual activity. I don't care what you're doing and what you're doing. It's about how you are able or are not able to identify with this like language piece that connects to activity but isn't about activity.
I think the challenge for me is about the identify publicly piece, right? Because I think that I think about how for so many years people always thought about gay people as only sexual.
Sure.
They only think about queerness or being gay as being about sex. Right. And it's like, well, there's a lot more to it than that. Right there. And like, we don't even have to get into the whole list of things that are included under like how queerness works. And that is beyond just sex. But I think like the publicly identifying piece is like a social aspect that I don't really think should have any piece to do with what you are. Right. I think that like the having to like come out, because I think about Janelle Monáe. We talked about her Angie Martinez interview and we talked about Float. We talked about The Age of Pleasure. And like in her interview, she talks about how people were saying to her like, oh, well, why didn't you tell us this sooner? Like that you're queer or that you identify this way or the various different intersections in which she now identifies. And she's like, well, I was growing up and learning these things in public. Right. And so like the need to have to identify that way in public wasn't something that I was even ready for particularly. Right. And so as I see these people who are kind of like moving through that, and I would even say that like we've seen your evolution of like your pronouns and the ways that you identify and what you will and won't take. Right. Like I think that evolution is still like you may be having a hard time identifying publicly in this way, right? Or growing into that. But that's why I'm asking about how you're defining this initially.
All of those things that you said about the complications around just like one's evolving identity are legitimate and are true and are valid, and I'm not taking that away from anyone. What I am also saying is stay your behind out of the pride feature.
But I think
that's specifically what I'm saying. That's specifically what I'm saying, right? Like I want to be clear. I want to be clear because this is, and I'm also coming from a standpoint of someone who has had to put together pride packages, right, for a magazine, right? If for whatever reason you have not yet, cannot yet, do not publicly identify and claim a label that falls under this queer LGBTQ pride thing, why did you and your team say yes to the pride feature that is about these labels? And what Ncuti did in their interview is talk about how pride for them is about a freedom to not identify publicly, a freedom to have a boundary between their personal and their private. And I'm just saying, it seems like pride is being rebranded again into something that is beyond what pride is supposed to be about.